Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a look at a really fascinating question. How exactly does political terminology shape our understanding of history, of authority, and of governance? Specifically, we're going to unpack the deep historical and linguistic roots of the term caliph. Like, why is the head of an Islamic state actually called a caliph? And what does that word really mean when you get right down to it? Let's find out. So here's our quick roadmap for today. First, what is a caliph? Then, successors to the messenger. Third, imams and leaders. Fourth, kings, sultans, and shadows. And finally, defining future Islamic leadership.
Section 1. What is a caliph? The core definition of Islamic leadership. So the word itself, khalifa in Arabic, literally translates to successor or deputy. And this linguistic root is absolutely crucial because it tells us right out of the gate what the role actually entails. Basically, a caliph is someone who comes after someone else to take up a very specific mantle of responsibility. And classical scholars hit the nail on the head with this. Imam al-Mawardi wrote, "Imamate is prescribed to succeed prophethood as a means of protecting the deen and of managing the affairs of this world." So the big takeaway here? A caliph explicitly succeeds the prophet in ruling, governance, managing the day-to-day affairs of this world. They are not succeeding him in prophethood itself.
But the source material throws in a really vital caveat here. Titles don't define the reality. Historically speaking, a leader might have had the title of caliph without holding any real executive authority. Or, on the flip side, they might have possessed the absolute authority of a caliph without ever officially adopting the name. Ultimately, it's the functional, real-world reality of the governance that actually matters.
All right, Section 2. Successors to the messenger. Tracing the origins of the title.
So, Prophet Muhammad ruled over the early Muslim community primarily as a prophet. But since the era of prophethood ended with his passing, ruling had to continue based on the sharia law he established. When Abu Bakr was elected as the very first leader of the Islamic State, there was this natural debate. What do we actually call him? Since he was stepping in to replace the prophet in governance, he chose the title Khalifa of the Messenger of Allah, which literally just means the successor of the messenger. Now this is where it gets super interesting because it perfectly illustrates how language evolves. That original, frankly very humble title, Caliph of the Messenger, was later replaced by a much more controversial one by some Umayyad and Abbasid rulers. They started calling themselves the Caliph of Allah, which translates a lot closer to the deputy of God. It's really important to note that the vast majority of classical scholars completely rejected this Caliph of Allah title. They saw it as highly inappropriate simply because God is never absent and doesn't die, so he doesn't need a successor. In fact, if we look back at Abu Bakr's own stance, when someone actually tried to address him this way, he shut it down immediately. He firmly stated, "I am not the Khalifa of Allah, but rather the Khalifa of the Messenger of Allah." Moving on to Section 3, Imams and Leaders. Synonyms for the Caliph. You've definitely heard the term imam before, right? Well, based on early hadith texts, an imam is essentially just anyone who stands in front, or anyone who leads. While today we mostly use it for someone leading prayer, classical Islamic jurisprudence, or fiqh, used the word imam incredibly widely as a direct, interchangeable synonym for caliph, or the supreme head of state. And let's look at a great historical anecdote that shows how practical all of this had to be. When Umar ibn al-Khattab took office after Abu Bakr, technically he was the Khalifa of the Messenger. But the companions quickly realized, okay, this naming convention is going to get way too long with every new ruler. So just for practical brevity, they all agreed on a brand new title, Amīr al-Muʿminīn, or leader of the believers. And that one stuck. It remained a dominant title straight through the Umayyad era. Section 4. Kings, Sultans, and Shadows. The fragmentation of power. Okay, let's trace how this massive authority eventually split apart. Around 661 CE, the Umayyad era starts taking on characteristics of a hereditary monarchy. Fast forward to 934 CE, and the rise of powerful regional groups like the Buyids completely fragments executive power. The caliph in Baghdad essentially becomes just a ceremonial figurehead. It actually wasn't until 1517 CE that the Ottoman Sultan Selim I conquered Egypt and officially reunited that real executive power, the Sultanate, with the caliphate. During this really long period of fragmentation, specific titles popped up to reflect how governance was changing. Malik, which means king, was used to indicate hereditary rule.
Sultan, on the other hand, became the go-to title representing raw executive authority and military force. And then you had titles like custodian of the two holy mosques. That one was used by various powers, from the Mamluks to the Ottomans all the way to the modern Saudis, really to showcase religious guardianship over the holiest sites. But despite all these shifting titles, early Islamic thought maintained a really strict ideological line between a caliph and a king, a malik. The distinction was all about justice versus absolute sovereignty. Umar ibn al-Khattab captured this perfectly. He noted that a khalifa only ever takes what is lawfully due and spends it correctly, whereas a king acts arbitrarily, just taking from one person and giving to another based on personal whim. By the time we get to later empires, the claims to authority get quite mystical. The Ottomans, for instance, adopted the title Zillallah, or the shadow of Allah. This actually derived from a hadith describing the Sultan as the shadow of God on earth. And as you can imagine, they used it heavily to reinforce the absolute, unquestioning obedience that was owed to the ruler. So looking at this massive variety of historical titles really begs a fascinating question for us today. What does our source material actually argue regarding a theoretical future Islamic state? Can they just use any title they want? Which brings us to Section 5, Defining Future Islamic Leadership, Unity and Terminology. The source argues pretty objectively that political terms today must align with Islamic laws of ruling. They draw a hard line between what they consider acceptable historical titles like king, imam, Amīr, or sultan, and modern Western titles like king, president, or emperor. The core argument here is that those modern titles carry very specific historical and legal baggage from outside the Islamic tradition, and because of that, they contradict the intended structure of an Islamic government. So why does this matter? According to the source, explicitly using the title caliph today achieves a few really vital goals all at once. First off, it immediately dispels any confusion about what the political system actually is. It also serves as this powerful, unifying banner for the global Muslim Ummah. That clear identity facilitates global support, and it unmistakably connects the state directly to 1,400 years of Islamic tradition. And there's a huge psychological weight to this, which was highlighted brilliantly by the 20th century thinker Rashid Rida. He observed, the title remains useful as people would accept actions taken in the name of the caliph that they would not accept if they were taken in somebody else's name. The word itself just carries a unique political gravity. It has a deep, deep capacity for mobilizing public acceptance. But, and this is crucial, we arrive at the source's ultimate conclusion. While a title might be totally necessary for identity and unity, true legitimacy only comes from actual authority and the actual implementation of sharia law. Simply calling yourself a caliph without the real-world authority and the practice to back it up, that means absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of things. Which leaves us with this final, frankly provocative thought to take away from the explainer today. If a historical title has the sheer power to unite an entire civilization, what does our choice of modern political language actually say about us? Are we simply adopting words, or are those words actively shaping how we govern ourselves? Thank you so much for joining me to explore this one. Keep asking those big questions, and I really hope this helped you grasp the incredible weight of history behind a single word.